Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories to fall asleep to. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. I was watching a video about YouTube analytics and how they work in the year of 2025 the other day, and they put a lot of emphasis on how important likes are, so I am shamelessly asking if you feel this video is deserving of one to please leave one. Also, if you're new here, or even if you've been watching for a long time, turning on post notifications would also be really cool. That way you'll never miss a new upload. I usually post once about every 5 days, 5 days to a week roughly, so there's always new content for you to enjoy. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. When I was 10 years old, I drowned in a lake. I was gone for 8 minutes. No pulse, no breathing. The doctor said it was a miracle I survived without brain damage, let alone survived at all. My parents called it divine intervention. They were religious, after all. But I wasn't the same after that day. Not just because of the flashbacks or the fact that I stopped going near water entirely. Hell, I couldn't even shower for weeks after... I know, gross, but... something else was wrong. I stopped sleeping completely. At first, the doctors thought it was trauma. My body was flooded with adrenaline, making rest impossible. They ran tests, kept me overnight in sleep studies, even put electrodes on my head to monitor brain activity. But the results just confused them. My brain acted like it was sleeping. It cycled through REM patterns. My body entered the rhythms of someone in deep sleep, but I was awake, fully aware of every passing second, every movement around me. I should have been exhausted, delirious, unable to function, but I wasn't. I never felt tired. I never needed sleep. It should have been a real gift. That's what people told me when I got older. Imagine all the time you have now, they said. No wasted hours. And think of all the hobbies. But they don't understand. They don't know what happens when a person is awake for too long, because we're not supposed to be. Because there are things in this world that only come out when we sleep. And if you stop sleeping, they notice. At first it was small things. I'd see flickers in my peripheral vision, shadows that disappeared when I turned my head. I thought it was just exhaustion manifesting in weird ways, except I never felt exhausted. Then the whispers came. I'd hear them at night, murmuring just below the threshold of comprehension. If I turned on the lights, the voices stopped. If I played music, they slipped beneath the sound waves. No one else heard them. No one else understood what was happening because, well, it was just so inconceivable. I mean, you see it in horror movies, but those are just movies. Then they started getting closer. One night when I was 16, I woke up to find a man standing at the foot of my bed. This was the first time I had seen them. He was tall and thin, dressed in a black suit that looked soaked through, as if he had just climbed out of a lake. His face was wrong. Not distorted, not monstrous, just wrong. Like something had copied a human face but got the details slightly off. His lips were too thin, his nose too sharp, too long, his skin too smooth. But his eyes weren't there at all, just two hollow voids, darker than the rest of the room. I wanted to scream, to move, to do something, but my body was locked in place. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes, hours. I didn't blink. He didn't blink. He didn't even breathe. And then just as the sun began creeping through the blinds, he vanished, like I wasn't even worth his time, like he was just checking on me, watching over me, making sure I was safe. After that, I saw them everywhere. A woman in the reflection of my bathroom mirror when I got up in the middle of the night, watching me with her mouth stretched too wide, like she was screaming in silence. A child sitting on the floor of my room at 3 a.m., smiling as he looked at a toy car dripping in water. A thing, a shape I can't even describe because it was wrong in ways my brain couldn't comprehend, perched on my ceiling, its head crooked like a broken marionette. They never moved when I looked at them directly, just watched. One night when I was 18, I got brave, or stupid enough to whisper, "What do you want?" The man in the soaked suit smiled, slow, knowing, "You are not supposed to be here." I didn't know what he meant. I didn't want to know, but I do know this. Every night, people all over the world close their eyes and sleep peacefully, unaware that something watches over them, keeping them safe. Because something does. And I think I was supposed to die in that lake. I think whatever governs the space between wakefulness and sleep, the thing that lets people drift into unconsciousness safely, I think it missed me that day. I don't think I was supposed to come back, and now I'm stuck, awake in a world where I was never meant to stay. Because sleep isn't just rest, it's protection. And when you stay awake too long, they start to notice. They realize you can see them. And now, after 20 years of sleepless nights, the whispers have changed. Not a warning, not a threat, just a fact. Time's up. I don't move. I don't breathe. Because for the first time since I was 16 years old, they moved. The man in the suit tilts his head just slightly. The woman in the mirror curls her too wide mouth into a smile. The child on my floor stops smiling. And the thing on my ceiling climbs down. They were never watching over me. They were waiting. And now I fully understand. I wasn't supposed to come back that day. And tonight, I won't. I recently turned 40 and I've had a pretty interesting life. Married, 4 kids, and a stable career. Unfortunately, during a checkup, I was told I was overweight. Wanting to live to see my grandkids, I decided I'd do something about it. Every day after work, I traveled to a local nature trail. There, I tried to walk at least a mile before going home. Between the serene sights of the forest and listening to music, it became a peaceful stroll I looked forward to every day. After changing some eating habits, I was relieved to see the weight come off, but I wasn't finished. After losing 20 pounds, I didn't plan on stopping. One day after work, I once again planned to go walk. This time, however, I noticed something different. A little ways down from the usual wooded path I took was yet another trail. I hadn't noticed it before, but maybe it was new. I didn't see any signs or human activity, but I figured why not? A change of scenery might be nice every once in a while. So I put in my earbuds and began my trek. As I started, I couldn't help but notice a few things. The usual trail had signs pointing you in the right direction and a wooden track to walk on. This one was only a grassy path surrounded by thick woods. It was odd, but I shrugged and kept going. With the oldies blaring in my ears, I was able to go over a mile. Now drenched in sweat and having a feeling of accomplishment, I was heading home with my head held high. While walking back, I failed to notice how deep I went, as the trail looked exactly the same. Getting tired, I was hoping that I'd see the end soon, but it just kept going, showing no signs of an exit. Looking up at the sky, I could see it was getting late. Feeling concerned, I pulled out my phone to call my wife and check in. Much to my chagrin, I had absolutely no cell service. With no other choice, I had to keep pushing forward. I walked and walked till I was out of breath, but still no exit. I'd sit on the ground trying to catch my breath and figure out an explanation. I definitely don't remember walking this far. Did I take another path? No, that was impossible. The entire trail was a straight line. Maybe I got carried away and lost in my tunes. Perhaps I had a burst of energy and went farther than expected. So I stood back up and continued my trek back. I noticed the moon starting to become visible, giving the sky a dark blue glow. It wouldn't be long until nightfall, and I definitely didn't want to be out here. I prayed that I'd see civilization again soon. After what seemed like an hour, I was still out here. I was so tired, and the path showed no signs of changing. Where the heck was I? Why was this happening? I know I didn't walk that far. I'm almost 300 pounds. Under normal circumstances, I could have called for help, but not only did my phone have no service, it was now dead, the battery completely drained. It's safe to say I was beginning to panic. Here I am, lost in the woods, and now it's pitch black dark. I couldn't hear anything. I didn't see anyone. This was getting scary. But even though things were looking bad, cooler heads always prevail, so I glanced over at the woods next to me and got an idea. Since this path wouldn't end, maybe the forest would lead to an exit. So I left the trail and started pushing through the thick brush. I could feel the briars sticking into my flesh and twigs cracking beneath my feet. I was so tired, praying that I was close to getting out of here. I wanted to go home and get something to drink, as well as explain myself to the wife. Just thinking about it gave me a sliver of hope. Unfortunately, I soon broke through the thick shrubbery. What I saw before me was the same path I had started on, the same path I had walked for hours. I was back on it, now panicking like never before. I ran through the trees once again. I don't know how, but maybe I got turned around while having to snap branches. Perhaps I just went in a big circle. Regardless, I was getting desperate. As I began yelling at the top of my lungs, screaming out, hoping that someone would hear me. I hollered until I was out of breath. I didn't hear anything in reply. I fell to my knees, feeling completely defeated. Something wasn't right. I don't know where I was, but it wasn't a nature trail. It felt like I was an ant trying to find my way out of a maze, like someone was toying with me. This was still Earth, right? Not some gateway to hell. My breathing got harder, this time out of sheer terror. I started to hyperventilate, swearing the woods were closing in around me. I wanted to see my wife again, my children, even my grouchy boss. I didn't want to die out here. I stood up once more and slapped myself to fight the panic. I had to make it out. There was no other option, so I ran. I ran and didn't stop, tearing through the thorns and vines, ignoring every sting. My heart was beating so fast, but I wasn't stopping until I found a way out. As the adrenaline flowed, I forgot how exhausted I was. I kept coming back onto that god-forsaken trail, but I wasn't giving up. I closed my eyes and kept running, not letting even death knock me down. After what seemed like forever, I ran into something hard. So hard that I let out a yell and hit the ground. As I opened my eyes, I was met with a ticked-off policeman. He let out a pained groan before shining his flashlight in my face. As our eyes met, his jaw dropped. He quickly grabbed his walkie-talkie and called for backup. The officer explained to me that I had been missing, and my wife had called for help. When he told me how long I'd been gone, I nearly fainted. The man said that I had vanished 4 days straight, and that my family was worried sick. He said that search parties had been formed and signs were hung up. He told me they had started to lose hope before I ran into him. Back at the station, I was reunited with my beautiful family. I hugged my kids so tight and gave my wife the biggest kiss. With tears in their eyes, they begged for an explanation. When I told them what happened, I could tell they didn't believe me. But seeing my cut-up legs and sweat-soaked clothes was a pretty good argument. The police would even give me a breathalyzer test to see if I was drunk. When it came back negative, everyone was confused. Since my explanation wasn't winning them over, I decided to show them the trail. The next day, my wife and 2 officers followed me to the path. I knew I wasn't crazy or a drunk, and they were about to find out. But as we arrived, I want you to guess what happened. The path wasn't there, instead only thick woods. The breath left my lungs. I absolutely couldn't believe it. Where did it go? It was right here yesterday. What was going on? While I stood speechless, my wife and the cops gave me an odd look. My wife told me that I must have been tired, that my job was getting to me. She said I needed to take some time off and relax. But I shook my head and persisted. This couldn't be happening. What happened to me? Where had I gone for all that time? Nothing made sense. I was brought home and told to rest. Everyone gave me sympathetic looks. As time went on, things went back to normal, but I'd never forget. Something strange happened in those woods, and I never got any answers. One thing was for sure. I ended up joining a gym like a normal person. I know what the title sounds like, but I can assure you that I am not a teenage boy freaking out about puberty. I truly am in a position where I can't shave. Not just my face, but everywhere. My arms, chest, legs, even the hair on my head. It's changing and I can't stop it. This has gotten so far out of hand that I figured I may as well look online in case anyone might know anything about my condition. I was born with very pale hair, not quite albino, but very light all the same. My skin and hair both have always had very little pigment. My hair is almost white and my eyebrows and eyelashes are nearly invisible. Most days, if I go out without sunscreen, chances are I'll come home colored like a tomato from sunburns. In fact, I was even bullied throughout my childhood because of my appearance. I had a hard time making friends because my parents insisted I stay inside most days. Well, if I'm being truthful, I was bullied because I was a sickly-looking kid with a lisp who liked anime, but my appearance and fragile skin definitely did not help me. I got used to it, of course, and it doesn't bother me anymore now that I'm an adult, but a few weeks ago, I noticed that the hair on my face was darker than usual. I normally keep myself clean shaven, but sometimes I'll forget to shave for a day or two. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a 5 o'clock shadow, which was far, far darker than it usually was. It was still only stubble, but it was unusual enough for me to notice. I shaved it off with no issue and forgot about it until the next week. Normally, I live by somewhat of a schedule. I need to shave maybe once every 2 or 3 days, but after I started noticing the darker stubble, that time began to shrink. I needed to shave every 2 days, then every day, then twice daily. It got to the point where I thought about growing a beard just to be done with it, but I didn't want to give up. I went to my doctor and explained my situation to her. She at first assured me it was likely nothing, but she recommended I keep a track of how many times I needed to shave for 1 week. I did as she asked. The final tally for that week was 24 times. She said I might have something called hypertrichosis. I googled it later because her explanation went over my head. What I can gather is that it's a condition caused by either cancer, medication, or metabolic disorders that causes abnormal hair growth. She prescribed me this hair removal cream that smells like burnt rubber and garbage. I meant to use it on my face twice a week, but that's meant to keep the hair off. And it hasn't been working at all. It removes my own hair, the light blonde colored hair, but the dark hair stays on. It's spreading too. At first it was just my face, but now my arms and legs are growing darker hairs too. I decided, screw the cream. I'm just gonna go back to shaving it off. It had gotten so long that I had a short, black beard and hairy arms, but when I tried to shave again, it bled. My hair bled. Thick orange-red liquid dripped off the ends of the hair, and it hurt too. The skin of my face ached and itched. I finished the painful process and showered to wash the substance off of me. Exhausted, I went to bed. The next morning, it had all grown back even longer than the night before. Spiky, almost chitin-like follicles protruded out of the skin on my face, arms, legs, and chest. And that's when the itching started. Horrible, non-stop itching everywhere the hair was. I went back to the doctors, but they had no idea what to do, other than giving me an anti-itch cream. Luckily, that's helped enough to allow me to sleep most nights. But my hair hasn't stopped growing. I was looking at myself in the mirror earlier today. The hair must be about 2 inches long, but when I looked closer, I almost vomited into the sink. They're segmented. They protrude out of my skin, and after about 3/4 of an inch, they have a clear joint where they bend like spider legs. I'm heading back to the doctor's today. Any outside advice is welcome. I have a sinking feeling that time may be of the essence here. The itching is getting worse, and to my horror and disgust, I think they're starting to move.
In the daytime, it's just an empty lot. Nothing but a rich collection of dirt, weeds, and tall grasses that stretch all the way to the trees. But every now and then, when the moon is just right, and when the air is so cold it hurts to breathe, the house appears at night. It's always the same, a dark 19th century Victorian mansion, complete with spires and enormous windows. The kind of place you would never see out here in the boonies. I had trouble believing it was real the first time. One of my college mates played a prank and gave me a cookie which was a potent edible. I was up all night at home, waiting for the unexpected high to pass. That's when I first noticed the house. Fully built, standing some odd 30 yards away. It was quite an experience, seeing a magical haunted mansion while thoroughly tripping. I thought it was just the THC playing tricks on me, but by the time I sobered up around 4 a.m., the house was still there. It was too real to be a hallucination, and too vivid to be a trick of the light. I took pictures on my phone from the living room, bathroom, and even the balcony. The house was a real structure, a real, creepy, pitch-black looking abode that gave an indisputable bad vibe. And then as soon as dawn broke, it faded away. Over breakfast, I explained to my grandma what I had seen, and even showed her photos, but she waved away all my nonsense. "Ain't been anything there for 60 years, she would say. "Don't conjure what isn't." I brought it up a few more times, but Grandma would always shut it down. "We're the only ones that live on this road, Robert. Don't be ridiculous. Are you on drugs?" Maybe I was just on drugs. The house didn't reappear any night after that, so I went back to focusing on school. The whole reason I moved out to live with Grandma was because her place was only an hour-long bus ride to college. But then came another evening when I stayed up late finishing an essay. When I went to grab some juice from the fridge, I saw it peering from the large kitchen window. The house. It was back. This time it appeared much more alive than before. A glowing fuchsia color shined out from its innards, and there appeared to be movement behind its windows. I knew I wasn't tripping again because I was writing my schoolwork. I was sober AF. Closing my laptop, I excitedly unboxed some binoculars. That's how I saw the shadows inside. It was way too dark to make out anything past silhouettes, but I definitely saw the tops of heads and shoulders pass by the windows and settle in various spots in the house. They moved with a casual, low-key energy, as if everyone was worn out, but still awake. Restless. Who were these people, and how were they inside this place? Then my attention turned to the trees ruffling behind the house, where a tall figure emerged from the woods. An immediate knot tied itself in my stomach. I had never seen anything like this person. He wore a velvet-looking frock above an embroidered vest and waist-high trousers, which were all somehow tailor-made to fit his 8-foot-long arms and legs. He moved like some anthropoid stick bug, shuffling and ambling, often using one of his long arms as another leg. Eventually, this bizarre 19th century aristocrat spider hunched over the door, took a glance at me and raised his arm. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. I was frozen. The figure's hollow eyes, even from that distance, felt like they were staring directly at me. His skeletal fingers made the come hither motion. He recognized my fascination. He knew I was being drawn to the house. He knew I was watching. He knew I wanted a deeper peek. The next morning, my grandma handed me a letter in a brown envelope with no return address. She said it must have come from my parents. I opened the letter and knew right away that it didn't. There was only a single piece of parchment inside, withered and worn. In this black ink, only 2 words were written in very old cursive. "You're invited." Where did you get this letter? Where do you think? My grandma poured herself coffee. The mailbox. Who dropped it off? Who do you think? My grandma burnt her lips on the coffee. The mailman. The mailman? You saw him? Jesus Christ, Robert. Yes, the mailman. He comes every morning round 8 when there's mail. How do you think mail works? Are you on drugs? Full disclosure. Back with my parents, I did go through a phase where I was smoking a lot of pot. They told my grandma there would be zero tolerance if I was ever caught blazing. They threatened with military school, community service, etc. So I've been careful only to blaze on the school grounds, never near Grandma's. No, Grandma, I was just wondering about the letter is all. Nothing else to wonder about. Now eat your breakfast. That night, after Grams went to bed, I played some Civ 6 to pass the time, eagerly awaiting midnight. Every 10 minutes, I'd check to see if that empty lot sprouted anything, but it stayed empty. By about 12:30 a.m., the house still hadn't arrived and I was disappointed. In the last-ditch effort, I put on several layers and brought one of my secret blunts with me. The first night I'd seen the mansion when I was accidentally high, so I figured it couldn't hurt to smoke a little now and see what would happen. After quietly closing the front door, I walked several feet away to make sure the light in Grandma's room was still off. It was. She was sleeping. With utmost secrecy, I brought the blunt and lighter to my lips. When a chill wind snuffed out the flame, my fingers went cold, my stomach formed a knot. The house had returned, and this time it was standing closer than ever before. Barely 3 car lengths separated my grandma's place from its front doors. It's like it was presenting itself. I walked toward it, driven by an impulse I couldn't explain. The air was thick, almost electric. I just had to take a peek. The normally untamed weeds and bushes were now suddenly pruned and lining a cobblestone path toward the house. I walked along the polished granite pieces until I reached the first wooden step. My heart slowed. The shadows inside seemed to shift, like something was moving toward the door. I inched backward ever so slightly, keeping my eyes on the knob. A figure, tall and thin like the one I'd seen before, stepped behind the frosted glass. Within moments, the front door swung open and his strange limbs came clambering beneath the wooden frame. The second I made eye contact, I met the strangest, most disarming smile I've ever seen in my entire life. For a moment, it felt like I had known this man for a long time, like this guy was the uncle I used to visit each year. Only I knew that couldn't be true. The smile had some kind of aura, something that emanated a fake nostalgia. I couldn't really put it in words when it was happening, but I am telling you now in retrospect. This guy had a powerful charm in between his gleaming teeth. My boy, my lad, it would appear as though you have accepted my invitation. Yes, indeed. The 19th century aristocrat spidered over to me at a somewhat alarming speed. Please allow me to introduce myself. I am Reginald Bedingfield Hollows, Esquire, the proprietor of this fine estate. His left hand effortlessly brushing the ceiling of the awning high above us. And you, my lad, simply must come inside. We have been dying to meet you. The demand is insatiable, my good boy. Inching away, I responded in a hushed tone. Who's been dying to meet me? Your friends, inside the house. He tried to follow my gaze. They all know you, dear lad. They've been watching you for a long time. Come in, come in. I could hear faint voices coming from deeper inside. It did kind of sound like a low-key house party. Somebody was delicately playing the piano. Can I think about it? Think about it? Reginald laughed, a perfectly pitched, high society laugh. What's there to think about, my boy? You've already accepted by arriving at my doorstep. You want to come in. My stomach was tensing up into some kind of triple knot. I was finding it hard to walk backwards. In fact, it would be quite rude not to come in. Quite rude indeed. Reginald's smile slowly dissipated. Especially after all the effort we put in. Today was going to be your night, Robert. They're all going to be so disappointed. How did he know my name? Like some kind of flexible instinct, he scooped his head down low to meet my line of sight. His teeth beamed at me like a glossy shimmer. You want to come in, Robert. We both know that. It'll be fun. Although I could feel my stomach contort itself further, an immense feeling of trust also breezed through my chest. It's like this was the 500th time I've met Reginald. It'll be fun? Righteous, Robert. A fete in your honor. A feast, a dance. The staring quartet has been practicing for ages. Again, that feeling of trust. I went from being merely tipsy to fully drunk on Reginald's nostalgia magic. His arm lightly rested on my back, guiding me through the front doors. I entered the house. The air was cold, freezing, in fact. I could see my breath in the dim light. The flickering purple glow came from several gaslit sconces on the ceiling. The walls seemed to stretch and warp, like the house wasn't quite real, like it was bending around me, enclosing me. I wasn't alone either. Figures moved in the shadows, their forms indistinct, their heads tilted in my direction. They looked human, but just barely. They watched me without blinking, staring with wide eyes. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I couldn't. All the walls and doors bended away from my touch. It felt like the house had a grip on my very soul, like it was pulling me deeper into its endless corridors. One of the figures stepped forward. A girl, also about my age. Her face was pale and stretched like a mask. She wore clothes that may have been in fashion about 20 years ago. You don't belong out there anymore, she said softly, her voice almost tender. You belong here now. You're one of us now. It was a mistake to step inside. Once you've seen what's behind those purple-lit windows, there's no escaping. The house never lets you go. I've had loads of time trapped in this house where nothing changes. I don't get hungry. I don't get sleepy. The police can't see the house, and they've blocked me for calling them too many times with my wild stories. My phone has been permanently stuck at 23% battery for God knows how long. Time doesn't seem to change here. Only warping corridors and college kids who all say the same thing. I came out here to live with Grandma. It was only an hour-long bus ride to school. Across one of the ever-shifting hallways, I once discovered a painting of my grandma wearing the same kind of aristocratic clothing as Reginald. She stared out with the same passive face, those same disinterested eyes. I've typed this story out on my phone, searching for help. I wish I could tell you where to look, but I have no idea where I am. The windows stretch away from me. If you ever see a mansion that only appears at night, and you come across a tall, spidery man that looks like Reginald, tell him that you are inviting me, Robert, to come inside. I believe there might be some kind of magic in the use of invitation. Some kind of sanctuary. At least, I hope so. It's my only chance of escape. If someone who reads this does find a way to free me from this limbo, I promise you my everlasting thanks. As a bonus, I'll give you this joint that never seems to run out. When I was a girl, I was afraid of the ocean. My father had always told me to stay away from the sea, and that alone would have been enough to make me wary. But one night after I'd been sent to a friend's for a sleepover, my father came to pick me up early and told me that my mother had drowned. The wariness that had been curled inside me thrashed at this so violently that I thought I'd drown in my dry room I was stood in. My mother had been an odd woman. She wasn't a bad parent, but it was clear that she'd fallen out of love with my father, and so I often heard strange, muffled arguments through the walls at night. None of the snippets that I could catch really made sense. She would complain how she wanted to return to the sea, as if it wasn't right there on our doorstep. I heard a confusingly intense plea for my father to give my mother a coat, even though she cared little for fashion, and had always had the odd ability to shrug off the cold even when the winds were bitingly cold. When we returned home, the place looked ransacked, but seeing the state my father was in, I didn't question it. In fact, I didn't ask him any questions about that night at all. There had always been an odd distance between my father and I, but the loss of my mother made it worse. I became panicky at any mention of the ocean, a horrible fate when you live a 20-minute walk from the shore. My father took to regularly going out to sea, a change that horrified me even more than it confused me. He'd never been much of a fisherman, but suddenly his friend would call him about a sighting of some potential catch, and he'd be off. I was told I wasn't allowed on these trips. I could think of nothing worse than joining him anyway. I wanted to move far away when I left home, but moving is expensive, and I actually ended up a little closer to the sea. I hated it at first, but I'd left then I never would have met Sam. Sam loved the ocean even more than I hated it. We met at the pub, and even though his job was just renting small boats to tourists and taking them on little jaunts along the coast, he seemed so enchanted by the sea. He knew myths and legends aplenty, and had told me 3 before our first meeting ended. It was hard not to love his enthusiasm. Being around Sam slowly changed how I felt about the ocean. Sam never actually tried to change my mind. He acknowledged that the seas could certainly be tragic, and my mother's death was tragic, but his attitude was so different than that of either of my parents. My mother had clearly wanted to spend more time at sea, but something had kept her away. And on the other extreme there was my father, who, even when he had decided he did want to start heading out on fishing trips, he did so with a bizarrely intense determination that had no joy in it. "Maybe he's fishing for the wrong prey," Sam suggested when I expressed my confusion about the situation. We were both a little drunk when this conversation occurred, and right away I could see Sam regretting his words. He'd always been polite with my father, but never quite seemed to actually like him. "What do you mean?" "It's nothing, I'm sorry." I pressed further, though, and eventually Sam told me, "Look, it might not even be true, but I heard rumors that the big catch that your father heads out to hunt is a seal." "A seal? What?" I didn't know what I'd been expecting, but it wasn't this. "Why would he?" I asked. "I don't know, but that's what Ben alerts him to, sightings of seals. Ben says your father pays him, but maybe he was making stuff up." I didn't really know what to do with this information, and our conversation moved on to other things. It wasn't until the next morning that I decided that I needed to know the truth about what my father was doing. Ben confirmed the seal story when I told him in the pub a few nights later. He had no answers as to why my father would possibly want to hunt for seals, but he had no reason to lie to me either. More importantly, he was more than happy to offer the exact same seal alerting services to me as he did my father, just as long as I was equally willing to pay. Later that night, I asked Sam to teach me how to use one of his boats. He was surprised, but more than happy to take me out after work the next day. I told him almost truthfully that I wanted to try to get rid of my fear of the open water. I was shaking the next day, but even when Sam asked if I'd changed my mind, I pushed forwards. That first session was only 10 minutes long, and I returned to the shore dizzy with fear but asking if I could go again sometime. The first text I got from Ben, I couldn't do anything about because all of the little boats were currently being rented. The second I was at work for, and didn't even see until hours later. The third time was a charm though, and I borrowed keys for one of the boats and headed out towards the cold, dark sea. If I hadn't missed one of those 2 earlier texts, then my whole life would be different. But instead I took the boat out in the direction that Ben recommended, and soon enough I saw another boat in front of me. The sound of the shot alarmed me. I hadn't really thought about how my father would be hunting a seal, but I suppose I'd assumed he'd be using a net. As he pulled the seal's corpse onto his boat, I got closer until I was close enough to see the knife in his hand. Carving away at the creature he'd hunted, I screamed. My father hadn't noticed me until the scream. I don't know if the sound of the gunshot had temporarily deafened him, or if he was just so manically focused on the task in front of him that everything else had faded away, but either way, my scream drew his attention. "Stay away," he yelled. I was close enough now to see that he was covered in blood, and had been partway through skinning the seal when I'd interrupted him. I stood up. It wasn't a seal in the boat. It had been a seal when he'd shot it. I was sure of that. I'd seen a seal being pulled onto the boat, but the partially skinned thing lying dead by his feet wasn't a seal anymore. It was my mother. He'd killed my mother. Sam had told me a legend about a selkie on our first date. Beautiful shapeshifters who can turn from their human form to that of a seal by pulling back on the seal skin they've shed. They love for the sea, but sometimes in myths, a selkie's lover will hide the seal skin away so that the selkie is doomed to remain on land. The myths Sam told me never said what a child of a selkie would be like, but seeing my father there, the skin of a seal in his hand and the corpse of a human by his feet, I didn't care. I moved my small boat close enough to the other that the sides scraped loudly together, and tore my life jacket off as I ran at my father. His knife was still in my mother's skin, and he failed to free it before I sent us both over the side of the boat. I unbuckled my father's life jacket and tore it off him as we thrashed in the water, and then I drove. I've had no reason to believe that I could swim. I'd never had lessons or practice, but something I knew that I could do this. I had my father's neck in my crook of my right arm, and even despite his panicked flailing and massive drag factor, I was still making progress. My legs kicked forcefully, and I could feel my father getting weaker. I'd never felt stronger. I continued to descend, even after he'd stopped moving, and when I finally returned to the surface, I was alone. I climbed into my father's boat and gently stroked my mother's cheek. Her seal skin was partially attached to her, and I knew that nobody could find her like that. With the taste of bile behind my teeth, I held the knife that was still stuck in her and cut the coat loose. I couldn't bring her back with me, but that was okay. Burying her on land would have felt like a betrayal, knowing what I know now. We weren't too close to the shore, and it was well and truly dark now. Nobody would come looking for my father until tomorrow at the earliest, and when they did, what would they find? The seas are dangerous after all, and sometimes people get hurt. It could be a problem that Ben knew that he texted us both about the seal the night before my father's death, but I wasn't sure he'd say anything. Even if he did, hunting seals can be dangerous. An accident would be far more believable narrative than an unarmed woman who'd barely been to sea successfully finding and killing someone like my father. The knife we'd both used to skin my mother was thrown into the sea with her body. I kept the seal skin with me, though I was too afraid to drape it around my shoulders. Would it be able to turn me, as it could turn her? Was I ready for either answer to that question? Either way, I wanted it with me. It was the only thing I had that felt like it had ever truly belonged to her. Back at home, I dried the skin and hid it away at the back of my wardrobe, uncomfortably reminded how my father would have hidden it from her all those years ago. I remember how much of a mess our home looked when I was brought home from the sleepover all those years ago. I realized how desperately my mother must have searched and how well my father must have hidden her skin from her. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the bath taps. The sound of the water was calming, and when it was finally deep enough, I climbed in. It felt too small, though, and I understood why my mother had felt out of place here. When I was a girl, I was afraid of the ocean. Today, it feels like home. I've been homeless for a little over a year now. Ruby, my '97 Honda Accord, has been my only constant through it all. When I lost my apartment, my job, and most of my friends, she was still there. She's old, yeah, and probably not worth much to anyone else, but to me, she's everything. She's the only thing keeping me off the streets, the only thing keeping me alive. I've grown attached to Ruby in ways I never thought possible. Maybe that sounds weird, but when you spend this much time with something, depending on it day in and day out, you start to feel like it's a part of you, or maybe you're a part of it. But lately, I don't know how to explain it. Something's been happening, something that doesn't feel right. It started small. At first, I noticed faint impressions on my skin in the morning, patterns from the fabric of the seat. That made sense. I've been sleeping in the driver's seat most nights, curled up in ways that can't be good for my body. But then the marks started getting deeper. Like, too deep. Not just surface level indentations, but grooves in my skin that didn't go away for hours. Then one morning I woke up and realized I couldn't move my arm. It was stuck to the seat. Like, actually stuck. I tried pulling it free and it felt wrong. My skin didn't just lift off. It stretched. It was like peeling off a band-aid, except it wasn't adhesive. It was me. There was this awful, wet, tearing sound as I yanked myself loose. My arm stung all day, and when I looked back at the seat, I saw this faint pink patch left behind. I told myself it was just friction. Heat, sweat, pressure. It had to be something like that, but it's been happening more and more. Every time I wake up, there's something new. A part of my leg fused to the upholstery. The side of my face stuck to the headrest. I've started keeping a bottle of water nearby just to pour over myself when it happens. The water seems to help loosen the bond, but it doesn't stop it from happening again. And it's not just the sticking. It's more than that. The other night I noticed something strange about my left thigh. The skin felt thicker, rubbery. When I pressed into it, it didn't feel like flesh anymore. It felt like vinyl, like the seat beneath me. I've been wearing jeans most days, so I didn't even notice it at first. But when I rolled up the fabric to look, I almost threw up. The skin on my thigh wasn't skin anymore. It was the same dull gray as Ruby's seats. The same texture, the same stitching. I sat there for hours staring at it, rubbing at it, scratching until my nails broke the skin, but nothing changed. It didn't bleed, it didn't hurt. It was just there. Like it had always been a part of me. Every day it's worse. I can feel Ruby on me, in me, even when I'm not touching her. When I'm out of the car, walking to a gas station for food, or trying to find a quiet spot to park, I feel this pull, like she's calling me back. Like I'm leaving something behind when I step away. A few days ago, I woke up and felt something pressing into my chest. When I sat up, I realized it wasn't just pressure. It was connected. The seatbelt had fused into my skin. I could see the faint outline of it stretching under my shirt, digging into me like roots. I tried to pull it free, but it wouldn't budge. I had to take a knife to it, cutting the belt where it met the buckle, and even then, I couldn't get the pieces out of me. They're still there now, buried beneath my skin. I don't know how to describe what's happening to me. My body doesn't feel like my body anymore. My joints ache in ways they shouldn't. My skin feels foreign, like it's hardening in places, softening in others. I can feel Ruby every time I move, this deep, stretching sensation, like we're tethered together. I've stopped trying to sleep outside the car. The last time I did, my legs gave out the second I stepped onto the pavement. It felt like I was being torn in half, like parts of me were still inside Ruby, refusing to let go. I had to drag myself back into the seat, and the moment I sat down, the pain vanished. I can't leave her. I don't mean that figuratively. I physically can't. Every time I try, my body fights me. My legs buckle, my chest tightens. Even thinking about leaving sends this wave of nausea through me, like I'm betraying something important, something alive. I've started finding pieces of myself inside the car. Little patches of skin on the seats, flecks of hair woven into the fabric. The steering wheel has this faint, oily shine now, and when I touch it, I feel something. Warmth, pulsing, like it's alive too. I know what's happening. I just don't want to admit it. Ruby's eating me. She's breaking me down piece by piece, pulling me into her. I can feel her growing stronger every day, and I can feel myself disappearing. I'm scared. I don't know how much longer I have before there's nothing left of me but a stain on the seat. But the truth is, part of me doesn't even care anymore, because for the first time in my life, I don't feel alone. Ruby's taking care of me, in her own way, and as much as I hate to admit it, I don't think I could live without her. Or maybe I should say, I don't think she'll let me. I didn't always have the ability to lucid dream. When I was younger, I used to do all these rituals while awake to try and encourage my awareness of reality. I'd hold my hands out in front of me and count how many fingers were on each one. I'd look at the time and ask myself if it made sense. I'd observe my surroundings and check the books I stacked in a specific pattern were all in order. I even took to drinking strange teas brewed from exotic leaves I'd purchased online, even if the taste made it difficult to finish. Nevertheless, it was only when I got tired of trying and abandoned this phase that I began to experience consciousness in my dreams. At the beginning, I was elated to have unlocked this superpower. I'd compulsively record the events in my previously neglected dream journal, detailing every path I chose, person I chose to see, and place I visited. I'd conclude each entry with a paragraph of lines. The words, "Tonight, I'll lucid dream again," written over and over to manifest more. When I obsessed over it, however, it wouldn't happen. It was only when I forgot about it that I'd stop what I was doing, sensing some strangeness around me, count my fingers and find 6 on one hand. One of my favorite dreams, over a year ago now, I was at work in the cafe as always when I got a strange compulsion to look at my hands. It was a terrible shift. Everything had been going wrong and each customer seemed to be looking at me. As I suspected, my hands were completely deformed before my eyes. I let out an exhale and a mixture of amusement at the sight and relief that I was in a dream again. As soon as I had figured it out, I halted my breath and composed myself. I'd long since learned to conceal my awareness from the characters in my head. I had no reason to believe anything bad would happen if I said aloud that I was asleep. But there was an instinctive fear within me of letting anything find out. After my strange display of checking my hands and sighing, my colleague, Eloise, gave me a tense look. I didn't like the way she looked at me. Her eyes met mine and her expression changed, her head tilting forward slightly so that she was looking at me from the corner of her eye. "Andrea?" she drawled out. Nothing, I exclaimed. waving my hands frantically before she'd even said anything. None of this matters anyway. She didn't seem to like that, opening her mouth to say something, but I shut my eyes and began to spin around, just as I'd willed it to. The room was different when I opened my eyes. No more strange customers, no colleagues, just me and the ex-boyfriend I'd been madly obsessed with. For my own dignity, I'll call him something similar, like Miles. My fanaticism over a relationship that ended isn't something I like to share, but in my defense, our one-sided relationship was something I only ever planned to keep in my dreams. Miles was a frequent visitor of my lucid dreams. At my request, of course. In this dream, I served him a coffee and whispered that I was a fan of his work and music. I did my best to be respectful and secretive as to not blow his cover in public, even though we were completely alone. In my dreams, he'd always become the famous singer he'd dreamed of being himself. It seemed to make sense in the storyline I'd like to create. He was as gracious as ever, expressing his thanks and then offering me to join him for a drink as though he'd forgotten me and we were strangers again. I can't, I said, smiling at him with as much charm as I could muster. I'm still working. He looked around the cafe and motioned to the lack of customers, allowing me to admire the flawless beauty of his side profile. I don't see any customers, he said, a mischievous tone to his voice as he rested his chin in his hands. A little caught off guard, I looked around also. Right, yeah, I mumbled. I didn't think you'd be aware of that. You didn't think I'd know we're alone? He said, tilting his head. I sat down opposite him, swooning. No, I mean, I don't know, I said, fumbling over my words. What I'd meant to say was that I didn't think he'd be as aware of our surroundings within the dream as I was. After all, he was merely a character created by me. How was I to know he transcended the logic of dreams? The situations and the rules I produced seemed to occasionally flicker out of my control. I held out a hand. My name's Andrea. That's a beautiful name. We proceeded to have a lovely conversation over coffee that we never seemed to drink, before he invited me to ditch my work and head out with him. My memory of the dream became foggy after we left, but I recall seeing a few old friends out in town that I smugly ignored in favor of gazing only at Miles. At some points his hair and clothes seemed to change a little, much to my frustration, but I knew the dream was simply becoming unstable and that I was waking up soon. Whenever I noticed, I'd reach up to adjust his hair, muttering to myself that he wasn't holding together. He'd flush at my touch and smile like I was doing something romantic for him. Knowing I had very little time left, I began to rush us home to get out of the public eye. Alone, I remember that he kissed me, that amongst the fog of a collapsing dream, it was the last and yet most vivid, intense moment. A kiss within a dream was my favorite feeling. Every sense, every cell in my body seemed hyper-tuned to the moment. There was a warmness in my chest and a softness to his lips that reality just couldn't replicate. Not that it ever would. I remember awakening from these types of dreams with a euphoria that had me snuggling back into my duvet, trying to pull the dream back to me. I'd roll out of bed and think about different frames of the movie I'd made, reliving the feeling of him looking at me. With my morning coffee, I'd fill my dream journal with the story. I tried to recall the start of the dream before I'd become lucid. I'd been at work, doing my job as always. So what had tipped me off that it was a dream? The shift was going badly, sure, but that happened in reality every now and then. So why had something felt so wrong? The only thing that stood out to me was Eloise's face. She'd given me an odd look, and there was something about her face that was unnatural and wrong. But it was only once the cover was blown, once I'd counted my fingers, that I realized she wasn't right. It was an entire month after that before I became lucid again. During the next time, I was walking around a shopping center with a few friends. Old friends again. I seemed to revisit the past often within my subconscious. We stopped by a fountain when things escalated in our conversation. I don't remember what we were talking about, the group hollering angrily about something that felt important in the moment. but it was when Lydia addressed me that I realized. "Don't you have any remorse, Andrea?" was what she asked me, outraged. Time seemed to slow to a stop, gears in my head shuddering to a rusty halt. "Oh," I said, and I looked at my hands, the only living things in my fabricated surroundings. I had far too many fingers. I laughed freely. I was once again standing in the midst of my own creation, like a mad inventor. I turned around to survey the place, but when I looked back at Lydia, my joy was sapped away. Her face had changed. It was still her, but her hair had thinned out and turned dull. Her jaw was unnaturally wide, like the blood and fat from her face had drained, and her skin had become vacuum-packed to her bones. "Don't do that," she said hauntingly. She began to slowly shake her head. I felt myself frowning, confused by this tonal shift. I wasn't sure what it was, but everything was frightening all of a sudden, dread weighing down on me like a weighted blanket. I turned to my other old friends who stood, dazed, in my peripheral. When I tried to look at them directly, however, they were gone. I told myself I had no reason to be afraid. This was my dream after all. I closed my eyes and snapped my fingers in her unsettling face to make her disappear, but she wouldn't. When I opened my eyes, she still stood before me, her eyes sinking into her increasingly gray face. "You're not Lydia," I said slowly. When I'd said it, I meant that she simply wasn't real, but she started smiling. It was as though she agreed with me. She tilted her head to the side the same way Eloise had in my cafe dream. That's right, she wasn't Lydia at all, but perhaps she was something else entirely. I closed my eyes, panicking a little. I simply kept them shut as I gathered myself. This was my dream, my creation. I was in control here, so how could it possibly turn into a nightmare? I willed her to be gone, for someone nice to be with me instead, but when I opened my eyes again, she was still there. I snapped my eyes back shut instantly, so only an imprint of her figure flashed behind my eyelids. For a single frame, I'd seen a ghastly grin below wide black eyes, one that stretched from ear to ear and arced unnaturally low. No, I told myself. I wouldn't subject myself to this while fully lucid. It wasn't fair of my own brain to do this to me, knowing I was aware of myself. So I squeezed, scrunched my face up, and shook my head over and over and over. And when I awoke, I was in my bed. This was my method. When I'd realized I was dreaming within a nightmare before, this was my way of waking myself up. But I'd never had a dream become something terrifying while I was aware of it like that. Climbing out of bed in the pitch black, I padded across the curtains and opened them to try and figure out the time, where I was greeted by the blinding streetlights and black sky. I looked down at the fabric of the curtain in my hand. I couldn't really feel it, and I wasn't sure why I would look outside to check the time instead of just checking my phone. I hadn't had to dodge the tangle of wires that usually blocked my side of the bed either. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Of course I was still asleep. I smiled. I hadn't lost my chance to have a nice dream and gazed down the street. It was unnaturally foggy outside and I didn't like that, but it didn't seem to change when I tried to make it sunny. When I took in the stretching emptiness of the street, a face with a chilling smile flashed into my memory, and I stiffly turned to look at my bedroom door. It was cloaked in darkness, so much that I could barely make out the frame of it. That familiar horror set into my core, paralyzing me to the spot. I didn't want to look at the door. Was it open? I wanted nothing more than to turn away from it, but something within me screamed warnings to not look out the window either. That same fear, the one I'd felt when I looked at Lydia as the thing, had me holding my breath. I closed my eyes, the only thing I could do to escape. It was here. I felt its presence. I knew my own brain well enough that I could feel when something was amiss. It was what had allowed me to begin lucid dreaming in the first place, after all. With my sight taken away, I could only wait in silence for something to make a sound or touch me. I tensed, anticipating something brushing against me. I expected it so fiercely that I was beginning to force it. Yes, someone's here. Someone's holding my hand, I was telling myself. Miles? I said quietly. That's you, isn't it? Miles' hand squeezed mine in response and I opened my eyes. I was still in the dark room, but now he was there with me. He was wearing the cap he often wore, back when we were first together, and he was smiling down at me. What is it? He asked, rubbing his thumb soothingly over the back of my hand. Nothing, I stammered. I thought something was here. Something horrible. He shrugged. Just me? He said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. This time he didn't feel like some celebrity that I dreamed up or some other perfect version of Miles that he would be playing. It really felt like him, and as though he knew exactly what was going on in my head. I pulled him towards me and breathed in his chalky violet smell, as comforting and fresh as ever. I miss you, I said. He stroked my hair and sighed. I miss you too. He breathed onto the top of my head. Where have you been, chick? Something was ringing in the distance, irritating me. Right here, I said. I'll always be right here, waiting for you. When I looked up, he wasn't wearing his hat anymore. His hair was wet. Aren't you going to answer that? He said. I gave him a puzzled look and listened out for the phone, afraid of who it could be. The ringing. It was my morning alarm. I was relieved it wasn't that dreaded phone call again, but my morning alarm wasn't what I wanted to hear either. I love you, I said, and I kissed him softly. I'd never been so furious at my alarm as I was that morning, turning it off and shutting my eyes immediately to try and will Miles back to me. But a demented smile was all I could see, forcing me to let go and allow myself to wake up. When I got out of bed, the first thing I did was count my fingers. 10, as there should be. Although in that dream I'd wanted nothing more than to be out of it, being in reality meant I could no longer have Miles, and the weight of that had my eyes watery as I made my coffee and got ready for work. It was on the drive to work that my phone really did ring. I knew better than to answer an unknown number, so I let it ring. My choice was further justified when the number tried me 3 more times. I had 10 fingers when Eloise said good morning to me, and 10 fingers when I stopped for lunch. What's on your mind today? She asked me, sliding up beside me. I analyzed her face for a second, looking for anything to cross-examine when I encountered her at night. Nothing really, I said. I just haven't been sleeping well. I thought so, Eloise said, humming thoughtfully. You look exhausted. Thanks, I muttered with a half-hearted laugh. Seriously though, she reiterated. Have some caffeine or something. I'm not saying this to be mean, but I've been cleaning up after you all morning. I shot her a look of bewilderment. I had no recollection of being such a mess behind the counter all morning. I had the urge to double-check I was really awake. Oh, I'm sorry, I said. I didn't even realize. That's okay. I'm sorry to criticize you, it's just that... Eloise paused to check no one would overhear her. Mallory's been watching you. With an exaggerated roll of my eyes, I started picking at my nails. I'm sure she has, I grumbled. She's been looking for an excuse to fire me. Don't be silly, Eloise exclaimed, giving me a light tap in the arm. You know she can't fire you anyway. You're invincible here. She might just have a chat with you if you get another order wrong. I held up a hand. Whoa, 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 I said. What do you mean invincible? Eloise leaned back from me, her shoulders dropping. She opened her mouth and faltered. I began to piece together that she'd said something precarious before she even elaborated. I just mean with everything, she said quietly. She wouldn't do that to you. Mallory, my mother's childhood friend, was talking enthusiastically to a customer on the other side of the cafe, unaware of her coworker's discussion of her. I knew she had given me this job to help me out, but I didn't realize I was such a hinder to her business, and that I'd left her trapped here with me. I'd already cost her customers by showing my face here. Now I was making a mess of the job, too. Eloise had left me to my thoughts at some point, catching on to the fact that she'd almost broached something dangerous. She busied herself with polishing and wrapping cutlery, as though that was an urgent task calling her attention. When I left work, I snuck out to avoid a talk with Mallory. I hope she didn't figure out that I could hear her calling out to me as I walked out with my headphones on. I couldn't avoid her stern lecture forever, but at least for today. I knocked out by midnight, but nothing I dreamt about that following night stuck in my memory long enough to be of note. I only know that I woke up feeling more tired than ever, afraid and paranoid that something had smiled at me again that night. For a month or so, I was unable to keep up with the films my brain showed me. I'd simply be an audience member to the display my subconscious was able to come up with. If I ever managed to get a hold of myself, to realize I was dreaming, the cycle would begin. The cycle, as I referred to it, was this torturous phenomena in which my dreams and my reality began to blur together. One of the most notable occurrences of the cycle was after a particularly troubling nightmare. I was with Miles, this time of my brain's own doing and not my lucid actions. We were on a boat together, the pair of us soaking wet after swimming in our clothes. We were laughing away, enjoying each other's company and the view of the sun dipping into the sea when he started shivering. Unaware that I was asleep, I began to swarm around him, wrapping him in my jacket and rubbing his arms to try and warm him up. He shut his eyes and seemed to go a little limp, slumped over in the boat, but his teeth continued to chatter. "Miles?" I shook him, but he gave no response. I couldn't begin to explain why, but in my dream state, I figured he was past the point of no return. He was too cold to ever recover. His lips were blue, his lashes seemed to be glued shut with ice. His cheeks were gaunt and his clothes hung off him like a scarecrow. Overhead, a gull began to dive at him, like he was a floating carcass ripe for the picking. Although I did my best to swat it away, it wouldn't relent, even trying to take chunks out of me. Infuriated, I decided to solve the problem, gently pushing Miles backwards. He slid off the boat like a rag as though his clothes were empty, teeth still chattering as he was submerged. When I started crying, the gull landed on the boat, where Miles had been sitting previously. It started clawing at me with a disgusting scream, so I started swinging the oar of the boat at it. It dodged me again and again, deafening me with its wounded yowling. At last I managed to hit it, sending it with a splatter to the bottom of the boat. There it lay in pieces, black eyes flickering around and beak quivering as it let out little bird-like chortles. Its eyes made me sick with terror. It was like there was something else in there, some parasite living alongside the bird that had now taken over its autonomy. That all too familiar fear of something else being present turned me lucid. I was asleep and I hadn't pushed Miles. This was just a nightmare. The bird got louder and louder with its pained screeches. Whatever it was, I stamped it out with an unbridled rage, and awoke with a gasp that hurt my chest. I was drenched in sweat, so much so that I considered the possibility that I'd pissed myself. The discomfort grew, and my chest kept hurting as I lay in bed, surrounded by the dark, so I tried to roll over in bed, but when I turned over, I stopped dead. There, in the dark, was a girl. She mirrored my position exactly, one hand over her head and the other under her chin, but she had large black eyes and a tiny mouth and nose, like her head wasn't fully developed. Gradually she began to open her mouth, where a black void laid within. It opened wider, beginning to distort her eyes, and my heart pounded so loud I was sure I couldn't possibly be asleep. Unable to move, I did the only thing I could think to do and shut my eyes, squeezing tight. I held strong for 10 seconds, and when I let go and looked, she was still there. So I tried again. I knew this would work. It always did, so I just kept squeezing, checking, then squeezing. After my fourth attempt, I opened my eyes to a bright room. With an uncontrolled sob, I snagged my phone from where it was plugged on the floor and checked the time. It was 8:43 a.m., meaning I was going to be late for work. I ran to work, sweating and trying to tie my hair up, but when I arrived, there was only Eloise and Mallory in the cafe, sitting around a table. There was a third seat for me, so I had a feeling I was in some deep stuff. When I sat down, they were mid-conversation. Mallory spared me a quick glance and then let out a groan, motioning her hand at me. "You see what I mean?" she said, pinching the bridge of her nose. Eloise shook her head disapprovingly. "I know, I've been telling her," she said. I looked between them, confused. Before I realized I was sat there in my pajamas, no shoes on and likely yesterday's mascara smeared across my face. "Please just give me another shot," I begged Mallory. "I can be a valuable employee to you, I swear. You can fire me if I'm useless, okay? You don't need to keep me here just because you feel bad, but let me prove myself, please." "Did you run here?" was all Mallory said. "Yes, I stammered, wiping sweat from my forehead with shame, but then I stopped. The cafe was 13 miles from my house, and I had run here. No way in hell could I have done that. I checked my phone, 8:43 a.m. I counted my fingers. When I woke up, the little girl was there again, so I forced myself awake, 8:43 a.m. I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't rush to work. This was a dream, after all. I sat up in bed and looked around. Nothing felt off. 10 fingers. But I wouldn't believe it. I wrapped my arms around myself and listened to the silence in my apartment. Any minute now, my brain would summon something. I waited, but nothing came. It was only when I stopped waiting that there was a noise in the other room and the fear hit me. I had been trying to summon something, but nothing would come, so whatever was there now was no creation of mine. "Wake up, please," I said out loud. "Wake up, wake up." The noise in the other room had initially been a single tap, but it escalated into a scratching that seemed to scurry across the floor, towards my bedroom door. I shut my eyes. "Miles?" I called out. When I called out to him, the instance that followed was the first time I ever heard the thing speak to me. The sound was gravelly and echoed in my head like it was speaking right into my ear. There were layers of higher, whistling octaves and deep bass tones reciting the words, "He's gone." Some weeks after this particular cycle, I decided it was time to call him. He hadn't heard from me in over a year, but I had reached my wit's end. I'd spent my waking hours meditating, writing, and medicating, but I knew there would be no end to my nightmares if I didn't get some closure. I listened to it ring with shaky hands. I had no idea how he would react, but I only prayed it wasn't anger. I was the one who left him, so what right did I have to seek closure? "Hello?" came his voice, his soothing, safe voice from the other end. "Miles, hey," I said, my voice wobbling in response. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I know it's been a long time, and I know I shouldn't be doing this, but there's something I really want to talk to you about." I stumbled over my words as I spoke, unsure of what to even say now that I had the chance to say it. The line went silent for a little while. "Is everything all right?" he finally said. My vision blurred with tears at the goodness of his heart to even ask. "Well, yes, sort of," I stammered. "I just really need to speak to you, in person." He went quiet again. Just as I began to get antsy, he replied. "Okay," he said. "Do you want me to come over?" "Yes, please, thank you." I was practically wailing. Thank you, thank you." "Don't thank me," he said sharply. "I'll listen to what you have to say, but this won't happen again." I started nodding frantically, as if he could see me. That's fine, that's fine. Don't expect anything, Drea, he said. You left me, remember? No, I know. I began, but the phone started beeping in my ear. I pulled it away to see that there was someone else calling me. Hang on. I picked up and readied myself to start yelling at the unknown number to leave me alone, to go to hell, whatever curses and insults I could come up with, but I stopped short. Andrea? It was Miles' mother. I'd recognized that voice anywhere, after all the hours I'd listened to it scream at me. Hello? I whispered. I got up from my bed and looked out the window as though expecting Miles to show up already and save me from whatever his mother was about to tell me. Have you heard from Miles? She asked. Yes, I mumbled. I just spoke to him. Was he driving to you? I swallowed dryly, shielding my eyes with my hand. I couldn't answer her. I stared into the palm of my hand. Andrea, answer me, she began, her voice getting louder. Did you tell him to drive to your house? So what if I did? He's been killed, Andrea. My son is lying on a slate, freezing cold and full of water because you insisted on him coming to see you in these weather conditions. He drowned slowly, painfully because of you. I hung up the phone. 8 fingers on my hand. Miles was fine, I told myself. This isn't real. Nothing that feels this bad is ever real. When I woke up from that one, I was in a hospital bed. One hand held by my mother, and the other by Miles. I broke my hand free of his and counted. No good. I squeezed my eyes shut again and again. Wake me up, I whispered, staring at the white ceiling. Miles took my hand again. Why? He asked. His hand was freezing cold. His eyes looked darker than they usually were, and I had to close my eyes and look away from him. I trusted him up here in my head, more than anything. No matter how many times I stabbed him, pushed him, strangled him, he'd never be the one to hurt me. So what had changed now? Why now had the parasite begun to change the way he looked at me? The next time I looked at him, water seemed to be streaming from his mouth. He started coughing. I'm sorry, I breathed out. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. He tried to speak to me, but no sound would come out aside from choked gargling. His eyes were bloodshot, neck veins bulging. I continued desperately. I never would have left you there if I'd known there was a chance. I cried out. Please believe me. I didn't want you to die. He can't hear you, sweetheart. My mother said softly from beside me. Black hair fell to the floor from Miles' head in a clump as he convulsed, blood dripping from his nose that had become disfigured by his own nails clawing at his neck and face. He has to, I exclaimed, thrashing free of her grip. It's not too late, Miles. I wish every day it had been me left behind in that car. There were many times that I poured my heart out to him, that I was sorry, that I wanted to die in his place, but he never seemed to get the chance to hear me. At 8:43 a.m., after a long night of keeping awake, dosed up on coffee and cocaine, I got in my car and drove. Every now and then I'd catch glimpses of him in my mirrors. I'd remember the times we laughed, the times we sang at the top of our lungs. Each one reflected back at me. I remembered the last time, our big fight. He'd been yelling. He'd knocked my coffee out of my hands, splashing it across my lap and across the seat. I'd screamed back at him, glazed over with rage and masked by the dark. He'd missed the car coming around the bend on the narrow road. I was angry when I grabbed that wheel. I remember that very well. I pulled up at the bend and stared down the ditch over the dashboard. In that moment, in the last few minutes that I questioned myself, my phone rang. I never picked up these anonymous calls. Knew it would only be by someone trying to hurt me. But for some reason, in my current state of mind, I answered. I didn't even get a chance to speak before the voice on the other end said the word I'd grown used to hearing. Murderer. When I put my foot down and aimed it for the lake, I only hoped I wouldn't dream when I was dead. The drive down to the lake was longer than I remember the fall being. The car banging every rock as the ground fell away. One rock in particular jostled me so hard that I lunged forward and hit my head on the wheel. Something crawled down my forehead, so fast that it wasn't long before it reached my eyes and I saw blood. By the time I hit the water, I'd almost changed my mind, but the cold rushing in sobered me up and set me in my decision. Just as I dreamed it, I unfastened my seatbelt and crawled over to the passenger seat, exactly where I'd been that night, where I'd turned to see him bleeding out and completely motionless. Alive. It was when the cold water rose to my neck that I looked in my rearview mirror and saw it. The thing that my brain hadn't invited in was watching me sink with its black eyes, but I didn't have the strength to even be afraid of it anymore. Water filled my lungs and rattled me from the inside out. The pain was welcome, every nerve in my body reacting like electricity, but my physical reaction was to start madly clawing at the window, at the door, at myself, at anything. In the flurry of bubbles and the sound of my own muffled voice screaming, I saw in the bleary line of sight the number of fingers on my hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Living 5 miles from Florida's Atlantic coast means salt air bleeds into everything. The sun-bleached siding of our house peeling like sunburned skin, the tangled mangroves framing the tidal creek behind our property, their roots clutching at briny mud like arthritic fingers. Even the ice cubes in our freezer taste faintly of the ocean, as if the sea had seeped into the tap water while we weren't looking. Dad's 27-foot center console, the salty Serenity, might as well be a fourth family member. Her hull is pocked with barnacle scars, her vinyl seats cracked like desert earth, but Dad polishes her twice a week with the devotion of a priest tending an altar. Come June, when the pavement starts sweating by 9 a.m., leaving the backyard asphalt shimmering like a mirage, our weekend routines shift. No more strolling Cocoa Beach at sunset, the sand cool and sugared between our toes. No more road trips to Georgia's mountains where the air smells of pine resin instead of decayed jellyfish. Just the Serenity cutting through Mosquito Lagoon's tea-dark water. Her twin outboards growling as Dad grins into the wind like a kid gripping a roller coaster bar. His baseball cap flipped backwards so the brim doesn't snap off in the gale. That Friday in July clung to us like wet gauze, the kind they'd press over a wound to staunch bleeding. Humidity hung pregnant over the intercoastal, thickening the air until dragonflies moved through it like swimmers fighting a riptide. The dock's wooden planks wept beads of condensation, and the rope's line sagged, limp as dead eels. Cicadas screamed in the palmettos, their drone rising and falling like a theremin's whine. Mom hovered in the kitchen doorway, her knuckles white around a ginger ale can. Her seasick armor, she called it, though we all knew the cure wasn't working today. The aluminum dented under her grip, droplets sliding down the sides to pool on the linoleum. She'd worn that same wilted smile when Dad announced the trip, her eyes tracking the Serenity's keys as they jingled in his hand. "Y'all go," she said, too quickly, her voice fraying at the edges. "I'll defrost the conch fritters for when you're back." The freezer hummed in agreement, exhaling a plume of frost as she opened it. Dad didn't need persuading. He was already halfway to the dock, his flip-flops slapping against the warped boards, shouting over his shoulder about a new sandbar he'd spotted near the Spoil Islands. "Gonna be glassy out there." Glassy meant flat water, which meant he'd open the throttle wide, let the boat fly until the bow lifted and the world blurred into seagrass and sky, the horizon line trembling like a plucked guitar string. I hesitated, watching Mom press the cold can to her forehead, her eyelids fluttering as condensation trickled down her temple. She shooed me off with a flick of her dish towel, a faded thing patterned with lobsters and anchor knots, but not before I caught the way her gaze snagged on the horizon. Not wary, not hungry, as if she were staring at a ghost ship only she could see, its sails full of the same wind that used to fill her lungs when she'd raced Dad to the channel markers, back when her stomach didn't turn at the smell of diesel and low tide. The salty Serenity sliced into the bay, her cooler packed with Dad's lime-flavored seltzers. Cans slick with condensation, their tabs hissing like tiny airlocks, and my mason jar of lemonade, still pulpy with rind the way Mom insists on making it, the bitterness clinging to the back of the throat like a secret. Mosquito Lagoon hummed with July's feverish energy. Jet skis zigzagged like water striders, their wakes crisscrossing into lace, while toddlers shrieked as mullet leapt silver arcs over their inflatable rafts, their scales catching the light like flung nickels. From Sharky's shack, its roof patched with license plates and fish nets sagging with plastic crabs, the tinny thump of Zac Brown Band covers drifted across the water, the chorus of Knee Deep, whirring through the guttural croak of bullfrogs in the sawgrass. Dad docked at their warped pier with a captain's flourish, the Serenity's hull kissing the pillings with a groan, and tossed the rope to a sunburned teenager whose shoulders blistered tomato red beneath peeling tattoos of anchor ink. The kid nodded like they'd rehearsed this 100 times, his bare feet gripping the splintered wood with the ease of someone who'd never known shoes. Time dissolved. We ate blackened mahi tacos that burned our tongues, the charred edges crumbling into our laps, their heat cut by dollops of mango salsa, so bright it tasted like summer itself. We laughed as pelicans dive-bombed for our discarded lime wedges, their beaks snapping shut with a sound like castanets, wings grazing the water's surface as if testing its temperature. The sun melted us into the vinyl seats, the material sticking to our thighs like warm glue, until dusk arrived unannounced. The horizon bled tangerine and violet, the water reflecting the sky's fire like spilled gasoline, iridescent and dangerous. Dad raised his seltzer in salute, the aluminum crumpled in his fist, condensation dripping onto his wristwatch. 2 nights that outshine days, he said, his voice roughened by salt and sun, and I clinked my lemonade against his can, the glass ringing below. I didn't yet notice how his toast sounded like a warning, how his eyes lingered a beat too long on the darkening east, where the first stars pricked through the bruise-colored sky. Darkness fell with the finality of a theater curtain, the last daylight snuffed out behind the spoil islands. Dad queued up his night cruisin' playlist, Springsteen's Growl, Seeger's Gravel Road Rasp, that one CCR song he swears every boat needs, and cranked the volume until the bass vibrated in my molars, the speakers buzzing like hornets in a jar. We glided into the unlit stretch beyond the channel markers, where the lagoon widens into a black mirror, the mangroves reduced to jagged cutouts against the moonless sky, the Serenity's running lights painted emerald ripples on the water, their glow dissolving inches below the surface, as if the lagoon drank the light whole. The air turned crisp, carrying the sweetness of night-blooming jasmine, thick as syrup, tangled with something sharper, metallic, like a penny held on a tongue. It clung to the back of the throat, a taste that wasn't quite a taste, as the boat pushed farther into the void. the only sound the churn of the engines and the occasional slap of a mullet fleeing our wake. We passed near a lighthouse, a skeletal sentinel perched on Ponce Inlet's crumbling jetty, its iron ribs exposed where storms had gnawed through limestone flesh. Its beams sliced through the dark every 10 seconds, a staccato swish-swish that let the foam around us in a stark, clinical white, bleaching the color from Dad's face and my trembling hands. Shadows leapt and contorted in its glare, seaweed became grasping fingers, drifting logs arched like the spines of drowned creatures. The light's pulse throbbed in time with my heartbeat, each pass leaving after images burned into my retinas. I gripped the console, the fiberglass edge biting into my palm. "That thing's straight out of a Stephen King novel," I said too loud, my voice cracking like the gulls screeching overhead. Dad smirked, his face half lit by the GPS screen's ghostly green glow, the other half drowned in shadow. "Built in 1887, he said as if reciting a psalm. "Back when this inlet ate ships for breakfast." He adjusted his grip on the wheel, the leather wrap creaking. "Your great-granddad used to supply the keepers. Said they'd trade whiskey for snapper, fresh snapper. Not that freezer-burnt crap." He nudged me, his calloused hand rough on my shoulder, the salt-stiffened fabric of his shirt scraping my neck. "Relax, kid. Only ghosts out here are the ones we bring with us." His laugh was a dry thing, lost to the growl of the engine, but his thumb tapped the throttle twice, quick and restless. The beam swept over us again. For a heartbeat, the lighthouse's brickwork seemed to ripple, its mortar oozing black as crude oil. Rivulets crawling downward like veins. Then darkness swallowed it whole, leaving only the aftertaste of that image, a wet, glistening rot. I blinked, but the tower stood inert again, its cracks and fissures frozen in the brief glare. The air smelled different here, the usual brine undercut by a dankness, like the inside of a storm drain after a flood. Dad killed the engine. The salty Serenity's hum died abruptly, leaving a vacuum of sound so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the click-click of cooling metal from the outboards. The boat swayed, creaking like an old floorboard, as waves lapped at the hull with wet, open-mouthed kisses. My skin prickled, goose flesh rising despite the humidity. I couldn't stop staring at the lighthouse. Its beam carved the dark into fragments, each pass illuminating the tower's peeling paint, its rusted railing clawing at the sky. It looked less like a guide now, and more like a bone jutting from a grave, something the earth had tried to bury that couldn't quite keep down. Dad rummaged in the cooler for another seltzer, the crack hiss of the tab deafening. "Trust the process," he muttered, though I couldn't tell if he was talking to me or the night itself. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the sound at first. Not over Springsteen's growl bleeding from the speakers, not over the Serenity's hull slapping the waves like a restless heartbeat. Then it came again, a scream, not the distant whoop of a drunk tourist, or the theatrical shriek of a gull, but a raw, guttural sound, the kind that shreds vocal cords, that belongs to animals caught in steel traps. It cut through the bass line sharp as a fillet knife. "Dad, kill the music." I lunged for the stereo, slapping at the volume knob. My palms slipped on its sweat, slick plastic. He flinched, his sunburned face slack with confusion, the pink peeling skin around his eyes crinkling like tissue paper. The speakers went silent. The quiet that followed was suffocating, a wool blanket pressed over the world, smothering even the lap of waves against the hull. "Someone's out there," I whispered. My throat tightened, every hair on my arms standing rigid as porcupine quills. Dad's grin from earlier had vanished. He gripped the wheel, his knuckles bleached white as barnacle shells, as the scream came again, closer this time. Or maybe the water carried it sharper, honed by the lagoon's curved throat. A woman's voice, fraying into a sob, skated across the black water. My eyes found the island, a jagged smudge in the moonlight, half swallowed by mist that coiled like smoke from a doused fire. No boats, no lights, just that ragged silhouette, its shoreline clawed by currents that could capsize a kayak in seconds, that could drag you down to where the crabs pick bones clean. We didn't move, didn't breathe. The Serenity rocked gently, mocking the stillness, her hull creaking like a taunt. I counted the seconds. 10, 20, 40, nothing. The lagoon stretched empty, a black sheet ironed flat, its surface oily and unbroken. No life jacket bobbed in the swells. No hands broke the surface, fingers splayed like starfish. Only the island, hunched and silent, a place where the water itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to exhale its secrets. Help! The cry tore through the night, brittle and fractured, the vowels splintering. Dad fumbled for the spotlight, its beam quaking as he swept it over the water, the light catching the iridescent swirl of bait fish, fleeing some unseen predator. The island loomed, all jagged coral teeth and spindly sea grape trees. Their leaves glistened like knife edges in the stark white glare. "Where are you?" we shouted in unison, our voices thin against the vastness, swallowed by the dark as if the lagoon had no bottom, no end. "Being followed," the reply screamed. Followed? My mind snagged on the word. "Are you on the island?" Dad barked, louder now, the spotlight jerking across the shore, illuminating skeletal driftwood and shadows that twitched like living things. Her answer was a scream, a serrated, sustained note that raised the flesh on my neck, that left my eardrums throbbing. "Yes." Dad didn't hesitate. The engine roared to life, a feral sound that scattered the quiet, the sudden violence of its sending a cormorant bursting from the reeds in a panic of wings. The Serenity lurched forward, bow slamming into waves as we charged the island, the hull shuddering like it might splinter. The cliffs reared up, pitted limestone glowing bone white in the spotlight, pock marks gaping like eye sockets. Dad anchored 20 yards out, the chain grating against rock as breakers hissed, hungry, against the hull, their form glowing faintly with bioluminescent algae, tiny blue sparks dying as they struck the boat. Up close, the island was a feral thing. Seaweed clung to its rocks like matted hair, reeking of rot and brine. The trees leaned at cruel angles, roots exposed like tendons, their bark sloughing off in leprous patches. No footprints marked the narrow beach, no torn fabric fluttered in the branches, just wind hissing through sawgrass, a low, wet sound, like the island itself was breathing. We pulled on the boots Dad had stashed in the Serenity's compartment, stiff rubber reeking of mildew, soles treadless as dolphin skin, climbing out shirtless. The rocks bit into my palms, sharp as crab claws, while the boots slipped on algae slick stone, each step a gamble. Dad's flashlight beam juddered ahead, a frail yellow circle that deepened the darkness around us, the shadows pooling like spilled ink. "Call out," he demanded, his voice cracking. The beam swept over gnarled trunks, over tide pools, glinting like 1,000 watching eyes, their surfaces trembling with the scuttle of translucent shrimp. No one answered. The chill that crept up my spine wasn't the night's doing. It slithered, serpentine between my ribs. "She could be injured," I said, the words crumbling as they left my lips, dissolving like sand in a receding wave. or trapped. Dad's jaw tightened, the tendon flickering like a fishing line under strain. He swung the flashlight beam inland, its light fraying at the edges as it cut through undergrowth, exposing spider webs strung between sea grape leaves, their silk glinting like nooses. We moved in tandem, boots crunching over shells and driftwood, shouting hello into the void. Each call dissolved into the wind unanswered, the island drinking our voices whole. The ground squelched beneath us, sodded with tidal muck that reeked of sulfur and spoiled eggs. Deeper in, the air turned cloying, salt rot and wet limestone, the stench of something decaying beneath the soil, something too large to name. Mangroves crowded us, their roots knuckling up from the ground like buried skeletons, the bark sloughing off in papery strips. "Can you hear us?" Dad bellowed. The cliffs threw his voice back, warped and watery as if the island itself were taunting us, mocking our futility. Above, night herons croaked their disapproval, wings snapping through the canopy like wet canvas tearing. The sea hissed, a relentless audience to our search, its rhythm syncopated with the ragged tempo of our breathing. Then, a guttural, choked scream, not distant, close, human, but strangled, half swallowed, as if the mouth that made it were stuffed with kelp. The sound hit me like live wire to the ribs, my muscles seizing. Dad froze, the flashlight trembling in his grip, the beam skittering over roots that now looked like coiled snakes. No words passed between us. We ran. The island fought us. Sawgrass lashed my forearms, drawing blood that welled back in the moonlight. Sand spurs clung to my jeans, their barbs needle sharp, and my boots skidded on moss-slick rocks, each misstep threatening to twist my ankle. Dad's flashlight beam juddered wildly, carving grotesque shadows from the trees. A hunched figure here, a reaching hand there, all vanishing as the light swept past. My lungs burned, salt and iron coating my tongue. The scream looped in my skull, primal, wrong, propelling me forward, even as the terrain turned jagged, cruel, the ground buckling into fissures choked with sea wrack. I stumbled onto the eastern shore, heaving for air, the beam flitting over tide pools alive with scuttling crabs, over boulders crusted with barnacles that yearned like tiny mouths. Nothing. No crumpled form in the surf, no footprints in the muck, just the moon staring down, cold and dispassionate, and the silence, that silence. It pressed against my eardrums, thick and smug, as if the island had swallowed the woman whole, and now licked its lips, sated. Dad caught up, sweat gleaming on his temples like mercury, his chest heaving. He opened his mouth to curse, to rationalize, but no sound came. The flashlight's beam shrank, dimming, as if the darkness itself were leeching its power. The batteries drained into the hungry earth. We stood gasping, the screams echo still thrashing in our skulls. Had we imagined this whole thing? The thought slithered, cold and unwelcome around us. The mangroves swayed, through the air hung motionless, their roots creaking like arthritic joints. My flashlight trembled as I swung it toward the shore, the plastic casing creaking in my white-knuckled grip. The beam carved a trembling path through the dark, scattering shadows like roaches fleeing a struck match. The light caught on strands of seaweed dangling from mangrove branches. Their tendrils swaying through the air hung utterly still. And there, where the surf gnawed at the rocks, foam hissing between jagged teeth, it stood. Not human, not animal, a thing of angles and voids, its silhouette a mockery of anatomy, as if a sculptor had assembled bones at random and called it done. Moonlight glazed its emaciated frame, ribs like scythes curving inward, joints knotted and inverted, legs spiraled as if wrung by giant hands. Its skin, if it was skin, glistened wetly, reflecting the beam in oily streaks, the surface rippling like mercury disturbed by a fingertip. The head lolled backward, neck tendons straining like ship's rigging, as it stared into the moon's glare with lidless eyes, peopleless voids that swallowed the light whole. Then slowly, wrongly, it pivoted toward us. The movement was liquid, boneless, its spine undulating like a sea whip caught in a riptide. The flashlight caught its face, a collapsed star of features, eyes like pooled mercury swirling with refracted moonlight, a mouth too small, too precise, a razor-cut slit that peeled open, cartilage crackling like crumpled cellophane as it spoke. "You found me." The voice was a flawless mimicry of the woman's, her panic, her pitch, but warped, as if played through waterlogged speakers. It didn't resonate. It slithered, bypassing the ears to coil directly in the gut, cold and invasive as a swallowed eel. My knees buckled. Dad's grip locked onto my bicep, fingers vice tight, his nails biting crescents into my skin. Run. No hesitation, no questions. We fled, boots skidding on kelp-slimed rocks, the thing's cries chasing us, sharpening with each step. "Help me," it wailed, each syllable fraying at the edges now, unraveling into something guttural, wetter, the sound of a throat filling with seawater. "Help me." The words splintered, layered with clicks and hisses, the chorus of corrupted voices overlapping, as if a dozen throats had been fused and torn apart. My spine seized, a primal recognition, older than language. This wasn't fear. This was prey knowledge. The hare's certainty that the fox's teeth are already at its neck, that the chase is just ritual. We didn't look back, didn't dare. The island's undergrowth tore at our clothes, thorns biting into wrists, sand spurs embedding in our ankles like fishhooks. Dad's breath sawed in his throat, raw and rhythmic, each gasp flavored with salt and copper. The Serenity's running lights glowed ahead, bobbing on the black water like a mirage, the boat's hull groaning as waves slammed it against the anchor. Behind us, the cries mutated. Less words now, more vibration, a subsonic hum that made my molars ache and my vision blur. I risked one glance. The thing stood at the tree line, its body contorted into a crouch, arms elongated, fingers splayed like mangrove roots, tips tapering into hooked spines. It didn't pursue, just watched. Head cocked at an impossible angle, as if savoring the taste of our terror. Its mouth stretched into a crescent slit that might have been a smile, or a promise. We spilled into the salty serenity like men fleeing a grenade blast, limbs tangling, boots scuffing the deck's non-slip tread raw. Dad clawed at the anchor line, his fingers slipping on the wet rope, the fibers groaning as if the sea itself fought to keep us tethered. When the anchor finally broke free, its surface caked in black sludge that reeked of low-tide rot, the clumps dripping like concealed blood, strands of seagrass tangled in the flukes like hair. Dad jammed the throttle forward. The engine screamed, a feral sound that drowned the island's silence. The RPM needle trembling in the red as foam boiled beneath the stern. Water churned behind us. The water glowed faintly with bioluminescent algae, a ghostly trail that pulsed as we raced toward open water. The blue-green sparks swirling into shapes, that might have been faces or hands. I gripped the gunwale, refusing to look back, but the thing's voice pursued us, crisp as a gunshot across the waves, its timbre flawless, inhumanly precise. "Come back," it shrieked, its tone now slick, almost musical, a lullaby wrapped in razor wire. "I need help." The words slithered into my ears, stripped of their earlier desperation, each vowel polished to a predatory gleam. This wasn't a plea, it was a performance, a pantomime of distress laced with a giddy, venomous edge, the sound of a child's music box cranked too fast, its melody warping into dissonance. What we encountered that night defies logic. If you are reading this, if you are skimming Florida's barrier islands at dusk, cocktails in hand, laughter spilling over the rails like something the night can't wait to devour, heed this. When the wind carries a cry from some lonely spit of sand, when your gut knots at the too perfect pitch of that "help me," do not answer. Steer clear, flood the engine. Pray the current drags you anywhere else. Pray harder, because whatever wears a human voice like ill-fitting skin, whatever peels back the night to show you teeth masquerading as a smile, it isn't lost. It doesn't want help. It wants you. Alive. Bleeding. Afraid. I could write a few books about all the strange and unusual, hard to imagine, I can't make this stuff up things I've encountered as an ER nurse, especially as a night shift nurse, but the book writing will have to wait for another time. The story I'm about to share took place April 17th, 2021, exactly 5 months from the date my mama passed from COVID. Side note, I also lost my best friend and my daddy all within a 9-month period due to COVID, so to say the last couple of years have been a real struggle would be an understatement. I digress. So, I'm on shift when I'm asked by another nurse to attempt an IV on one of her patients. I enter the room, introduce myself, and this patient that I have never taken care of or spoken to before says to me, "You have a wonderful aura about you." And before I have a chance to respond, she goes on to say, "And your mother is always with you." I instantly get chills, but I try to hide my WTF reaction and continue with the task at hand. When I touch the patient's arm to verify her wristband, she grabs my hand and looks me directly in my eyes and proceeds to tell me very detailed things about my mama that only I would know. I was beyond emotional and shook by everything she is telling me, so much so I had to excuse myself. I leave the room and run to the bathroom crying uncontrollably. I do my best to get it together when the lights in bathroom start flickering on and off for about 2 minutes. I literally just about peed myself, but I get it together and ask if there was just an issue with the lights anywhere else. Nope. Okay. No shocker there. I somehow get it together and go back to the room and apologize for previously running out so abruptly. The patient apologizes to me for upsetting me. I assure her that I am not at all upset. I just was not expecting anything like that, but I was absolutely thankful she was willing to share her gift with me, and much needed. I took a deep breath and I continue completing the initial task of placing an IV. I continue about the rest of shift without too much chaos. After I settle down from my shift, I call my sister-in-law and tell her about my night. I explain to her all the details of my experience. After my story, she tells me her son, my nephew, has something to tell me. He gets on the phone and shares his story. Now, around the same time this is going on with me at work, My nephew tells me he was having trouble sleeping. He couldn't really get comfortable, so he sat up on the side of the couch, and at that moment he says, "I seen Grandma. She was just standing there. It was her. I know it was." I comfort him and reassure him I believe him, and there was nothing to be afraid of. I then tell him Grandma was busy making her rounds letting us know she's okay, and is still watching over us, and that she loves us. I admit I did freak out a little at first, but more anything, I felt comforted in having that experience. I know my mama's just saying, "Hey, I'm okay, and I'm still with you." Now, I don't know how everyone else feels about spirits, mediums, or whatever, but I'm a believer. Thanks to those that took the time to read.